Companies that make video games obviously do something that we like a lot. They make video games, but they also do things we don't like. And to be frank, that's putting it pretty mildly. Hi folks, it's Falcon, and today on Game Ranks, 10 game company moves that sucked. Starting off with number 10, Platinum Games losing their way. The story of Platinum Games is one with some pretty severe ups and downs. It's a studio that put out both Bayonetta 2 and The Legend of Korra in the same year. The game they made before Nier Automata, TMNT, Mutants in Manhattan. Easily one of their worst games. Some might argue one of the worst games of the decade. I don't know if it's that bad, but it's not good. Oh boy, is it not good. There's no baseline with Platinum. They either put out an absolute classic or a total piece of shit. At least you used to be able to tell easily the creator-made games were good and the licensed games were bad. Then, almost out of nowhere, something changed. They were no longer developing Grand Blue Fantasy, Scalebound fell apart, and now they're making some live service game nobody asked for. It's commendable they're willing to do different things, but live service is not something they're good at, because Babylon's Fall was just shockingly bad. It didn't even seem like a game they wanted to make. They probably didn't. It looked cheap. Like, you could see their disinterest in the trailers. It was a game nobody was happy about, nobody cared about. It's a story we see all over. I mentioned Redfall and Arcane. I mean, we went into depth on the Suicide Squad killed the Justice League. The suits saw money in live service, so they went after it with zero experience and no real idea what they're doing. Just say all the right buzzwords and the money will start rolling in, right? Well, no. That's actually not how it works. It's a studio entering a totally new market they got no experience in. It's already overly saturated, too, so they're not bringing anything new or exciting to the table. So, of course, Babylon's Fall failed. It was a terrible idea. It was executed poorly. You could argue that Square Enix might be to blame. You know, these Japanese studios are usually pretty tight-lipped when it comes to internal matters, but with all the high-profile departures the studio's been seeing lately, something's gone wrong. Sure, Platinum can bounce back. I don't think that it's impossible. But with Hideki Kamiya out, he's back over at Capcom with a newly formed Clover studio making a new Okami. It's hard not to see Platinum as a studio on the way out. First, it was Clover, which got closed and came back as Platinum. Now there's Clover's. Maybe the two studios can coexist. Nothing would make me happier than that, in fact. But things didn't have to be this way. Reading Kamiya's recent statements about leaving Platinum, it's hard not to think there's some serious dysfunction going on there. Still, they haven't closed down yet, so anything's possible. It's not like they lost the recipe. That doesn't mean Babylon's Fall wasn't a hugely boneheaded decision. At number 9, Ubisoft making the world's first quadruple A game with an untested studio. Everyone wants a bite of that live service pie. I don't personally think it looks that appetizing, but you know. But what we've come to realize in the past year is that the traditional games industry giants like Ubisoft are uniquely bad at it. Yes, I'm talking about Skull and Bones, a game that started out as an obviously good idea, but for a variety of reasons, ended up being a massive boondoggle for Ubisoft. And one of the big reasons why they're currently in such a precarious position. So, Skull and Bones, when you hear it, everyone's first assumption was that it was going to be Assassin's Creed Black Flag without the assassin stuff. Black Flag was a game that really captured the fantasy of being a pirate. Imagine if somebody took that and expanded on it, cut the parts that were less well received, build up the stuff that was. The unfortunate truth of Skull and Bones was that it was never going to be that. Ubisoft Singapore were the folks who created the naval gameplay of Assassin's Creed, and that was the one aspect of the gameplay they knew how to do. So it was going to be the primary focus of the next game, which started out as a multiplayer add-on for Black Flag, and then spinned off into its own thing, was the only thing they knew how to do. It was never meant to be the next big thing. It was just going to be an excuse for them to do something else with the ship gameplay. And they got a lot of praise for the ship gameplay, to be fair. Then Ubisoft allegedly made a deal with the government that would get them a ton of cash, tax breaks, etc. if they further developed their Singapore studio and made it the lead developer on a AAA game. So to fulfill their agreement, Ubisoft had to release a game from the studio. The whole situation was a mess. The studio didn't have the experience to put out a AAA game, and the way Ubisoft ran things definitely didn't help. Constantly bringing in outsiders, throwing everything away, resetting production, only for them to jump ship and get replaced with someone else who would do the same thing. The project got reset multiple times. There was never any clear vision, except that it had to be finished at some point. They weren't going to throw the whole thing out because of their deal with the government. A game had to be released eventually. The decision to make it a live service game wasn't a great one, but the real dumbass move was making the Singapore deal in the first place. Clearly, Ubisoft wasn't able to transform these guys into AAA studio out of nowhere. Like, they didn't have the experience, and Ubisoft tried to brute force the problem, and that didn't work. But also, Ubisoft really should have just been like, all right, let's make a game that's like Assassin's Creed, but not an assassin game. You just take the pirate stuff from that game and make another game with it. That should have been what they did, and they didn't, which is stupid. And number 8 is Nintendo's litigious streak. The thing is, from a business sense, most of these make sense. A competitor's making a similar game, sure, yeah, try to shut them down, makes sense. Same thing with suing emulators, forcing them to cease development. You don't want pirates stealing your games, blah, blah, blah. All these lawsuits and shutdown notices make sense according to the law, but they suck. Remember when Nintendo shut down that Metroid 2 fan game just days after it came out? Nintendo's always been highly protective of their copyrights, even though it really doesn't matter. Like, people make tons of Sonic fan games, for example. Sega just doesn't do anything about it, and everyone's happy. Sega doesn't lose their ownership of Sonic because somebody made a fan game. It doesn't matter to them. In fact, it functions as free advertising and fills gaps between Sonic games, keeps the Sonic brand out there. But Nintendo hates anybody doing anything with their games if it doesn't involve giving them money anyways. And that sucks. Same thing with shutting down console emulators. It's bad enough. The only way to access most of Nintendo's vast library of games is to sign up for a subscription service. And to be frank, it's not all of them at all. It's missing tons and tons of games. As console hardware gets older, it starts to break down. Older games are becoming rarer, and besides becoming more expensive, that also has other problems. So for most people, the only way they'll ever get a chance to play games from the NES or SNES is through emulation. Yeah, Nintendo is mostly going after Switch emulators at this point, which I admit are riding a dangerous line, but they do send takedown notices to ROM sites, and that makes Nintendo games a little harder to find. They're still not super hard to find, it's the internet, but you end up having a sale of 7 Seas as much as it did in Skull and Bones. But the way Nintendo is acting isn't in a bubble, and a lot of companies that used to look the other way are starting to crack down in a similar way, and it's making it harder to be enthusiastic about these companies when they're treating their fans like this. And number 7 was EA and 2K's exclusive licenses for sports games. You can draw a clear line for sports games. There was before 2005, and then there was after, because that's the year EA secured the exclusive rights to the NFL. It used to be that sports were respected as something that it was part of a console's library like any other game. They were innovative and interesting. Now there's sports games and there's the rest of the games industry. They're on their own little island, isolated from competition and growing increasingly stagnant. And it's because EA secured the exclusive license for the stupid games and they suck now. It's not just EA. They kind of opened the floodgates with the exclusive licenses thing. And now there's one NFL game, one FIFA game, one NBA game, and fans have to buy them because that's all there is if they want to play one of those games. Sure, someone can make another basketball game or football game, but they have to do it without the official teams and players, so that cuts out a huge chunk of the audience automatically. These developers realize that having accurate rosters and updated player information is what sports fans actually want, and why shouldn't they? That's kind of the point of playing these games. It's just stupid that that's an exclusivity thing. And it really just comes down to pure greed, of course. They don't have to make a better product when they're the only one with access to the license, so they just milk sports fans for all they're worth with the yearly updates with minimal improvements, and they're still charging full price. I'm not saying all these games are terrible. Depending on the year, some of them are, pretty good and get even significant updates that make for much better experiences. But their only competition is themselves, and with a yearly release schedule, the meaningful improvements don't come often. Sports games as a whole can and should be better. They shouldn't be $70 roster updates infested with predatory microtransactions, but as long as there's exclusivity deals, there's nothing making these games change that practice. The only thing that could possibly put a dent in it is if people just straight up stop buying them. And call me cynical, but I don't think that's possible. Again, exclusivity kind of makes it so that they will get bought if somebody wants to play a sports game. So, I don't know, can we just agree that if somebody made an NBA Jam clone with a completely made-up roster, we would all buy it? Like, all of us? And number 6 is Blizzard's terrible remakes and remasters. Blizzard is currently thriving between Diablo 4 and World of Warcraft, which is back in good shape. They're doing well for themselves, but the slapdash way they remaster their old titles makes them look like a studio on its last legs. You already know about Warcraft 3 Reforged. It's something we've been complaining about for years. Long story short, they remastered the game by making it worse in significant ways, and even now they're still trying to fix it. Seriously, they just recently put out Reforged 2.0, which is better, but still kind of a mess. mess. It's crazy how bad they botched it. The updated Reforged is just one part of their celebration of Warcraft. They also released remakes of the first two games, Warcraft and Warcraft 2 Tides of Darkness. The new graphics looked like they came right out of a phone game. They were actually even missing graphical elements from the original, like the map screen, which eventually did get put back in with an update, but why was it not there? At least they make it so you can control more units at once, but on the whole, these remakes are just not up to snuff. Oh yeah, and because they exist, Blizzard pulled the originals from GOG, so you can't even buy the old ones anymore. You gotta get the overpriced, undercooked remakes. The only actually decent remake Blizzard has put out is Diablo 2 Resurrected, and that game is mostly developed by Vicarious Visions. Blizzard only did the Battle.net integration and the server stuff. Pretty much sums up modern Blizzard. The only people actually willing to show respect to the studio's legacy is a different studio entirely. Like, even then, Blizzard has all but abandoned Diablo 2 because they can't monetize it, so even when somebody gives them something decent on a silver platter, they'll just throw it away and focus on the one thing they really truly care about: stone cold cash and lots of it. And number 5 is Warner Brothers putting Rocksteady on a live service game. After Arkham Knight, Rocksteady could have done basically anything, right? Their unique brand of extremely high polish mixed with creativity and innovation, players would have happily followed them anywhere they went next. It didn't have to be another Batman project. It could have been literally anything, and people would be there day one. At least that was the theory, which was proven wrong by the disastrous launch of Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League. The game ended up being one of the biggest bombs of 2024. Warner Brothers admitting that it lost them around $200 million, which is a pretty fair amount of money. I could do with 1/200th of that, and now the game is on its last legs. They're ending support after the 4th season. The game performed terribly, obviously. It wasn't what fans of Rocksteady wanted. Clearly, the DC Universe thing was not the thing that should have been retained, but rather the fact that Rocksteady made carefully crafted single-player action games. Like, that's their bread and butter. I mean, you could compare it to Bethesda and then Microsoft making Arcane do Redfall. I hate what they did to my beloved Arcane. Anyway, back to Gotham. Putting Rocksteady on a live service game was what classic Joker would probably call a boner. It resulted in a decade of wasted effort. Arkham Knight was released in 2015. Suicide Squad didn't come out till 2024. Like, in that amount of time, they released the original Arkham trilogy. Here's the thing. I don't want to rag on the final game too much. There is some of that Rocksteady magic in Suicide Squad. It's not the worst game ever, but, I mean, it doesn't really matter. Having a little of the sauce in the recipe is not enough. Like, the game bombed straight up. Maybe it was the IP not appealing to people. Maybe it was the bad marketing. Maybe it was just not something fans of the developer wanted. There's never one reason why a game fails. But either way, it sucks to see what was once one of the best developers out there put in this position where they're in full-on panic mode. I don't think WB is going to axe them, but I do hope somebody at the company comes to their senses and puts Rocksteady on something that's, what they do best rather than another stupid live service gamble. And number 4, Rockstar chasing a live service tag. Listen, as much as it might seem like it, I don't begrudge people for making money. It's the ultimate goal of all business, and that includes the business of making games. So while it does suck when a studio that used to be really prolific like Rockstar just stops making games because of one singular groundbreaking success. Yeah, I'm talking about GTA Online. It's not that it's bad. In fact, it's good. Out of a lot of these live service games, there's a reason why it's successful. It's because it's enjoyable. That's the thing that a lot of them don't quite understand you have to do. But it's so successful that it has smothered basically everything else out of the studio. Like, look at the games they were making before Grand Theft Auto 5. There was Max Payne 3, the original Red Dead, where they made an expansion, Undead Nightmare. Grand Theft Auto 4 had 2 major expansions that expanded the story of the game and made a lot of gameplay improvements. Like, when GTA first came out, there was no reason not to expect them to do the exact same thing, and they even were going to do the exact same thing. But the single-player expansions never came. Instead, the insatiable beast that was GTA Online needed more and more content, so anything that wasn't GTA Online got pushed to the side. Whether that meant being on the back burner or being canceled outright, I don't know. That was all just rumor and hearsay for a while, but recently the voice actor behind Trevor revealed he did some work for a single-player story that never happened, which was a Secret Agent Trevor expansion. That would have been amazing, but we never got it. Was not meant to be. The crushing success of GTA Online even affected Red Dead 2. That game also never got any single-player expansions, but even worse was how they treated the online mode, which was neglected and poorly served almost immediately. They never even finished the online story, just it all stops halfway through. It's Rockstar we're talking about it too. One of the most successful developers on the planet, and they just leave the online story unfinished. All because Red Dead Online isn't making the same amount of money as GTA Online. Red Dead 2, the game that is arguably their masterpiece, never even got a PlayStation 5 update. For Rockstar, if it's not making them money, it just doesn't matter. It's like, guys, you can't afford to support your games that aren't called GTA Online. You're making so much money with that. I promise you have enough money to make more money with it. Hire some folks. Give them jobs. They deserve it. The gaming industry has had tons of layoffs in the last few years, and why not suck a few more of those people up? Either get them working on single-player content or put them on GTA Online to free up some of your current people to do that. I don't think you can't do that. Like, there's a lot of studios that are successful and support their games properly. Like, it's not even vaguely impossible. Much smaller companies than Rockstar do it, but they don't, and it's disheartening, especially for those of us who like their more experimental instincts. And number 3, everybody who tried to copy Nintendo and failed. And I don't just mean because Nintendo hates anything that even vaguely resembles their work, but doesn't end with them having more money. No, I mean something actually fairly different. Cast your mind's eye back to 2010, a time long ago where every console manufacturer not named Nintendo suddenly came to the same realization. Hey, we should do motion control too, like Nintendo. Like, if you don't remember the tyranny of the motion controllers, probably for the best. See, the Nintendo Wii came out in 2006 and took the world by storm. It was a crossover hit, and every bit of its appeal were the then innovative motion controls. Nintendo went all in on it, and also, I might add, did it well. Obviously, for certain games, it can be a lot of fun, but that doesn't mean the devs did not go way overboard with it and make games that were confusing and imprecise all over the place. There was some weird stuff on the Wii. Every damn game wanted to jam it in, and a lot of Wii games, for no real reason, had you jerk your controller around rather than just press a button. But generally, Wii was tolerable. There was some level of quality control because Nintendo at least understood what worked. But Sony and Microsoft, I don't feel like did get it. Like, the guidance on it was not coming from a place of, okay, we have successful motion control titles. Here's how to utilize our hardware, blah, blah, blah. Like, keeping in mind that there were a lot of duds on the Nintendo Wii, even with Nintendo doing that. PlayStation Move and Xbox Kinect were PlayStation Move and Xbox Kinect. Now, the PlayStation Move was mostly harmless. It was underutilized and generally actually was kind of good. It was also what they used for motion controls on the VR helmet, the original PSVR, which honestly isn't a bad thing. But the Xbox Kinect, so it was supposed to be a really big deal. Microsoft pushed it really hard. They even built it into the first Xbox One units. There was a little problem though. It sucked shit. Like, it didn't work. It was by far the worst motion controller, and I've never seen anybody set up and actually use it properly. It is, at least for what it's made for. Like, a lot of people use them to make cool things that had nothing to do with Xbox. Out of the consoles, the Wiimote was still the best. And if we're going to be serious, it wasn't that good. Even the stuff that was good, like Skyward Sword, actually did come up with a one-to-one sword swinging mechanic that was kind of cool. I mean, the game's better on Switch, where you don't have to use it. So, yeah, I'm glad the obsession with motion controls is pretty much dead. Good riddance. And number 2 is Sony's, so far, disastrous live service push. I know I'm pretty live service heavy on this list, but you get it, right? I mean, I don't hate live service games by default or anything. I mean, I don't hate motion controls by default either. Wii Bowling was fun as hell. It's just not every one of those games was a Wii Bowling, okay? And not every live service game. In fact, most of them have this huge problem where everybody's trying to force their way into an established market, thinking they're going to dominate, but that's not how it works. Live service games are a different thing. You can't jam microtransactions into a game with typical sensibilities and say, well, that's a good live service game. Let's put it out. We're probably going to be richer than we can possibly imagine. Let's start spending our time in strip clubs, throwing out them hundos. We are going to be so freaking rich and successful. You have no idea. Yeah, I always like envisioning the live service push as like nerd businessmen with a chip on their shoulder, because it feels like that. But out of the live service pushes we've seen so far, Sony's has been by far the worst. We're talking hundreds of millions of dollars lost with next to nothing to show for it. Okay, there's Helldivers 2, But that mostly comes down to the developers. They are the reason that the game is good, not Sony. So let's talk about every other thing that they've tried. Like boneheaded move number one, they bought Bungie for a frankly shocking $3.7 billion. That might have been the actual dumbest thing they've done so far. And I'm saying that as somebody who likes Bungie and Destiny 2. It's not at the height of its popularity, though. The latest expansion was supposed to be the big grand finale, and it just completely, didn't flop per se, but it underperformed by a lot. And what value is Bungie provided Sony so far? Well, they allegedly got the Last of Us live service game canceled, and they didn't do anything about Sony acquiring Firewalk Studios, the makers of the live service dud Concord. It's not actually known how much Sony spent for that studio. Estimates go as high as $400 million, but it could be closer to something like $200 million or less. Either way, they spent too much on a game that was shut down a month after it came out. Why? Because it sucked. Also, they closed the studio, so it was all just a big waste of time that cost a bunch of people their jobs. What makes these moves suck particular is that Sony is doing it in defiance of their own fan base. At this point, there's an understanding about what PlayStation games are. They're highly polished single-player games for the most part, with cinematic narratives, and that's what fans of PlayStation want, right? Not live service slop, especially when it's as shit as Concord is. Like, I'm not saying there's nothing good about Concord, but out of any of the things that could be recognized as good, you would want to filter out all of the other stuff and focus on those things for like another couple of years before you put it out and expected people to like it. PlayStation needs games and ones that people actually want to play. So seeing them burn all this money on stuff that their fans just don't give a shit about, it sucks. And finally, at number one, you had to have known this was coming. How Embracer shot for the moon but blew up on the runway. Yeah, we've made a lot of jokes about all of these studios that have been embraced, but maybe we should just be calling them Challenger rather than Embracer. Someone's gonna groan at that one. Too soon? Too soon? Anyway, the conspicuous rise and precipitous fall of the Embracer Group, it's going to go down in gaming industry legend. The whole thing was so misguided and poorly conceived and planned. It's kind of incredible. Embracer managed to acquire a metric shitload of game studios that, they got access to some pretty heavy-duty IPs like Tomb Raider and Deus Ex. At first, the possibilities seemed endless. There was going to be a new Deus Ex game. Hell, they were making another Time Splitters with the original devs. Old franchises were going to get a second chance. Then, the hammer fell. A $2 billion investment from the Saudis fell through, and the entire house of cards fell. Embracer was just the world's biggest investment scheme. All those acquisitions and game announcements were just ways to pump value into the company so that they could get some rich sucker from Saudi Arabia to actually foot the bill. But they were operating well beyond their means by buying all this stuff. The money they wanted never came, and the vast majority of the studios were cut loose. Some were lucky enough to survive in some capacity, but a lot of them were forced to end development on their games and shut down for good. I'm not a total idiot. I know that a lot of these studios were pretty much The Walking Dead anyway, so if Embracer didn't come along, they would have closed anyway. But still, the way those guys got our hopes up and turned around and squashed them really sucks. Like, there could have been a new Deus Ex. A new Deus Ex, people. The dream could have been realized. The amount of people who lost their jobs because of the idiot decisions of the Embracer CEO is terrible. The entire games industry was a bloodbath most of 2023 and 24, and way too many people lost their jobs for stupid reasons. That's a big thing. It pisses me off, but it also pisses me off, maybe more selfishly so, is that there were so many games that we were promised that were lost. They canceled 29 games in just 6 months. I want those games, Embracer. Give me the game.